You are now listening to 1-900 Old Ladies, The Lost Art of Making Lefse, written by Ellie Starr, narrated by the author. Post-production by Pinto Media. Chapter 14. When your potato and flour mixture has set for 5 minutes, you mix 3 tablespoons of the cream and butter mixture. But you have to watch and adapt. If it's winter or the potatoes are dry, you may have to use more. But if it's a year where the dairy cow's milk has been thin and the milk is not as creamy, you may have to use less. You'll have to figure out what works for you. When you get used to doing it enough times, mix 2 or more cups of flour. Did I tell you to use unbleached flour? Make sure it's unbleached. Mix well. And knead it 15 times on your flour drag. You don't want it sticky, but it's got to be wet enough to hold together. Sigrid Sievertson. When Ellen and Rosa returned late in the evening after a long day of shopping in Bismarck, Marge was exhausted. Both she and Stan Jr. had broken into the barn, discovered Stanley's rotted corpse, reported it to the sheriff, gave him access to perform an abbreviated crime scene investigation, and helped him ship the body off to the Bismarck coroner's office. They did all this without Ellen ever suspecting a thing. As in childhood, Marge was seldom squeamish about anything. She resolved to play it cool. It didn't bother her at all to find Stanley's body in the old barn. On the other hand, after discovering his father's lifeless and rotted corpse, Stan Jr. found playing it cool a very difficult thing indeed. At this point, he wasn't sure his mother wasn't at least clued into the details of his father's untimely demise. Marge and her young nephew had devised a plan for a more lengthy diversion to get Ellen out of town for 2 weeks. During that time, she and Stan Jr. could clear out the barn, survey its contents, and hold an auction of all Stanley's belongings. For many North Dakota farmers, auctions were a lucrative, all-day affair. They took a great deal of planning and work on the part of the sellers, usually required the enlistment of an auctioneer, and ultimately offered spectators a huge opportunity for socialization and entertainment. An auction in North Dakota was regarded more like an estate carnival, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to gather and bicker over the spoils and fruits of the seller's lifetime of labor. Rosa agreed that Ellen should take little Robert on the trip with her, while she stayed behind to answer Marge's 900 line. Of course, Stan Jr. reluctantly consented to this arrangement after his wife stubbornly insisted on doing so. Rosa argued that their plan for auction would be best served if she answered the line for Marge, thereby freeing Marge to help Stan prepare for the sale. And if Ellen took little Robert with her, Rosa might get a long-deserved break from the tedium of motherhood. Marge dialed the phone to call her son Joseph in Minneapolis. He worked as a site foreman for her twin brothers, Lars and Gunnar, in their very successful and profitable construction business. Hi, baby, it's Ma. Listen, I need you to do something very important for me. Well, I need you to take your Aunt Ellie off my hands for 2 weeks and get her out of this state. You need to come pick her up and take her to the Mall of America. No, I need you now. I need her out of my hair today. I've got some stuff I need to take care of here with your cousin Stan, and I need her gone. Joseph was obviously reticent to drop his work obligations in order to create a diversion for his Aunt Ellie. Clearly, this task just wasn't as important to Joseph as it was to his mother. What do you mean Uncle Lars won't let you go? Listen to me. Get my little prick of a brother on the phone now, she commanded. Lars reluctantly answered the call from his big sister. Even after 50 years, he was still a little terrified of his older sister's wrath. Hello, Lars. What's this I hear about you not letting Joseph get off work? She listened impatiently as Lars feebly tried to explain his apparent unwillingness to cooperate with Marge's plan. Finally, she interrupted him rudely. Listen, you little imp. I need you to give my son time off to drive his little Fanny over here and pick up your sister and take her to the Mall of America. You hear me? Marge angrily slammed down the cordless phone and yelled, Christ, I should have dunked that little weasel in the latrine when I had the chance. Marge informed Ellen of her pending plans for a brief vacation out of state. She also informed her sister that she was expected to care for her grandchild and cart him around with her on her trip. At first, Ellie argued against leaving Stan Jr. behind. He explained that he needed to stay behind and fix things up on the farm. He especially needed to fix the storm door for starters. In fact, he stated that there were so many items which had been neglected and needed his attention, he wasn't even sure 2 weeks would be enough time to accomplish everything he needed to do. He would simply have to prioritize and get through as much work as he could. After a good bit of persuasion, Ellie acquiesced. Marge had convinced her that she truly deserved a vacation and that everyone left behind would be just fine without her. She informed Ellie that she could stay with Marge's eldest son in Minneapolis. Soon, Ellen's initial concern transitioned to elation when she realized that she would be going to Minneapolis to visit the brand new mall. And she was even more excited to be spending quality time with her new grandson. Gosh, I hear you can spend days in that place, Ellen confided. Goodness, I'm so excited. She made happy faces at little Robert in his high chair. Grandma and Robert are going to have so much fun. She winked at the infant, and he smiled back. When Marge's son, Joseph, arrived at the farmhouse the next day, Marge greeted him at the door. Ellen had excitedly packed her belongings for the trip the night before. I'm so excited, John, dear. This is going to be the best trip ever. The name's Joseph, darling. And yes, it's going to be the best trip because it's the only trip you've ever had. Marge kissed her sister goodbye by pressing her face against either side of Ellen's cheek. Keep an eye on your Aunt Ellie, dear. Then she whispered quietly to her son. Make sure she doesn't accidentally burn the house down or forget little Robert at the mall. Yes, Ma, Joseph obediently replied. You're a good boy. Now, go, get lost, his mother commanded. At Margie's bidding, Joseph, Ellen, and little Robert left the state of North Dakota on the trip of a lifetime, a quest to the Mall of America in Minneapolis. At first, Marge was worried that Rosa Peters would not do well at answering her 900 line. But after listening to her field a few calls, Marge's fears were soon assuaged. As a matter of fact, Rosa was almost more talented at answering Marge's line than Marge had been lately. Rosa addressed the task with a renewed enthusiasm. For her, it was a refreshing respite from the boredom of housewifery and motherhood. Stan Jr., of course, could not bring himself to listen in on his wife's explicit phone conversations. He knew that Rosa was far from being a saint, but Stan unrealistically put his wife on a pedestal, much like he did with his mother. He still couldn't fathom the idea that any woman might stoop to having to sell sex chats to horny men when they knew full well that they were probably masturbating on the other end of the phone line. He tried to convince himself that if his efforts to raise cash from the sale of his father's estate were successful, it would have been all worth it. This entire plan for the 900 numbers would be stifled when he presented his mother with enough cash monies upon which she could comfortably retire. Once Margie was assured that she could hand the reins of her burgeoning business over to Rosa's capable hands, she paid a concerned visit to the sheriff. She knew that Paul Baker and his wife Doris had always been fond of Ellen. After all, it was Paul who contacted Marge to convince her to move clear across the country to take care of her sister. Marge also understood that Paul might be able to offer her some insight into the details of Stanley's demise. Her plan was to coax Paul out of a little additional information in order to hurry the case along. Perhaps if Marge intervened, a just and speedy outcome might be arrived at for all affected parties. She sat at Paul Baker's desk, but she tried not to flirt overtly with the attractive yet highly esteemed sheriff. "What brings you here, Miss Carter?" "Well, Paul, I'm just a little concerned for my sister. I don't know what I would do without her." "I see. Do you think that Miss Sievertson might have murdered her husband?" "Honestly, Sheriff, I don't know. Now that I think about it, it's possible. If she did, everybody in town knows she was probably driven to it. I'm not sure if she did do it, she would even remember it at all. She's definitely losing her mind. I mean, just today, she greeted my oldest son, Joseph, by calling him by the name of my dead husband, John. I tell you honestly, Sheriff, I don't know what to do. If I could just get some idea of what actually happened, how Stanley might have died, I might be able to answer some questions. I mean, I'd hate to see that you went through all of the trouble of getting me up here to take care of my sister, only to see her get carried off to some state loony bin for the criminally insane. Ellen's much too fragile for that kind of place. That wouldn't do anybody any good, would it?" "Nope, you're right, Mrs. Carter. I hate to see that happen to Miss Severson. We all loved her dearly. Unfortunately, the case is now in the hands of the Bismarck coroner. We'll have to see what he decides." "What he decides?" "Yeah." Paul scratched his chin for a moment. He opened a manila file folder and read his report. "It looks like Jim McDaniel has been assigned the autopsy at the Bismarck Medical Examiner's office." Margie seemed interested. "Really? Maybe you could tell me a little bit about this guy." "Well, he's a pretty nice guy. Not originally from here, of course. Only been here for about 10 years. I think he came from Atlanta. He's mid-50s, single. I understand he has a penchant for loose women and a good cigar." Marge started to lick her lips. "Really? And he's good looking?" "Well, now, Mrs. Carter, I couldn't tell you one way or the other about that, but the ladies sure seem to like him." Paul grinned nervously. "Okay, then, one more thing. Where does he like to hang out?" Marge inquired. "I've heard he frequents Peacock Alley on Main Avenue. Their steak sandwich is pretty good." I'll have to give it a try. Thanks for the info, Sheriff." Ellen Sievertson rested her elbow on the passenger's side door of her nephew Joseph's car. As they raced eastward on Highway 94 in his metallic blue Ford Taurus, she opened the window all the way down and stuck her hand out. The warm summer wind brushed against her palm and blew through her hair. She, her nephew Joseph, and her infant grandson were on their way out of the state on an 8-hour journey to Minneapolis. She sat quietly enjoying the scenery. A few times they passed sunflower farms. The fields were freshly plowed, and no plants were yet apparent. They had not reached their full growing potential since the harvest season was still 5 months away. Soon the green flowers would emerge from their gestating pods. Their infantile stalks would grow strong and thick, and the mature flowers would climb to heights taller than a fully grown man. As Ellen felt the heat of the summer sun beating down on her face through the dirty car windshield, she closed her eyes. "I'm a lot like a sunflower," she thought to herself. "I'm waiting to emerge and show my true character in all my beauty and ravishing glory. I am pointing my face toward the sun." And she smiled at her nephew and looked behind her to address her grandson. Little Robert was strapped obediently in his infant car seat. He looked up at Ellie and smiled. "Oh, little Robert, we are going to have such fun. I haven't traveled this way in a very long time." Soon the car of weary travelers passed a great sign on the highway. Ellen pointed to show her little grandson. "Look, hon, it says, 'Welcome to Minnesota.'" Oh, how exciting. Clap your hands. Can you clap? She unfastened her seatbelt and reached back to hold her grandson's pudgy hands. She clapped them together. Good boy. She turned back around in the passenger seat and refastened her seatbelt. She smiled at Joseph. He's a good boy, just like his papa and his grandpapa. After another hour of driving, Ellen and little Robert fell fast asleep, while Joseph drove the last leg of their journey to Minneapolis. Joseph had delivered his aunt and her grandson safely to his home. He called Marge to let her know that he had arrived in one piece. His wife, Melinda, had graciously situated Ellen in the guest bedroom. Look, Ma, I think Aunt Ellen is going senile. Didn't you say she'd never left the state of North Dakota? Never. She's never been anywhere. Why do you ask? Margie inquired. Because she acts like she's been out here before. She talks about some old places and stuff like she might have been here eons ago, Joseph stated to his mother. See, that's what I'm talking about. I'm telling you, she's never been out of the state. The only long trip she's ever been on was when she went to college in Dickinson. Not only that, Ma, she talks to little Robert about his grandpapa, Uncle Stanley, like he was some kind of great man instead of the lowlife that he was, Joseph added. Margie shook her head in disgust as she held the phone to her ear. There wasn't anything great about Stanley, except his size. So what do you want me to do, Ma? I don't know, Joseph. Your auntie is friggin' losing her mind. Just keep an eye on her. Don't let her stray too far or leave the oven on, and make sure she puts her pants on before you go out. Other than that, I'll keep you posted on things here. Love you, son. Mwah. Bye-bye. Okay, Ma, call me.